Hey everyone, I'm Harv, Ian Harvey, founder of Collective Intelligence, and this is Stuff That Matters Now. Okay, so here I am in Palmerston North. I'm talking to Tim Myers. G'day, Tim.
G'day, Harv. Good to see you.
And good to see you too, mate. And Tim is the CEO of Norwood, formerly known as CB Norwood. You went through a rebrand a wee while ago.
Yeah, we just tried to declutter it. So there was CB Norwood Distributors Limited, and then there was the Norwood Farm Machinery Centre, and the reality is our customers knew us as Norwood. So why don't we just call ourselves Norwood?
Oh, that's pretty dramatic, mate.
Yeah, it is, eh?
Big deal.
Yeah.
And Tim, just explain what you guys do.
Well, the business is changing. So, what we do today is still quite similar to what we've always done, which is a big integrated import distributor of tractors, farm machinery and equipment, etc.
Yep.
We have a nationwide network of retailers, or dealerships, as they're called in the industry, 25 odd of those, spanning the length of the country, and we sell a lot of the product that we bring into the country through those dealerships. Right. So about 400 people. We went through a reorganisation last year. About this time last year, there was probably 460, 470 people in the business. Today, there's 400.
And Tim, was that shedding of numbers and so forth done before COVID?
Correct.
Yeah. So it was just part of a restructure.
Yeah, it was a really comprehensive reorganisation, and some of the CQ team would be very familiar with a couple of the people that helped us out with it. So purely by coincidence, we entered COVID pretty lean, but like I say, purely by chance. We'd done a lot of that heavy lifting sort of back in October, November last year.
Cool. And tell me, how long have you been CEO here for?
Well, I've been the general manager of the New Zealand operation. That was the first role I had here when I moved back from the States in 2011. Couple of years after that, I became COO, and that was a trans-Tasman role. At the time, Norwood was in Australia, or starting to build a business in Australia, and one of the first things I had to do was close down the Australian operation in my role as COO. And then about 4 years ago, I became CEO of Norwood, which is now just a New Zealand-based or New Zealand-focused business.
Okay. And look, why I was really motivated to come and talk to you, Tim, was that I'd heard through the grapevine some of the stuff you're doing locally, and then we had a chat, and I thought this is the time to interview you. And so how long have we known each other?
Well,
7 years.
No, it's more than that, because
it?
I was part of Collective Intelligence in an official sense for about 7 years.
Oh, okay.
And I became part of CQ about a year after I moved back from the States. So it's at least 7 or 8 years.
Right. Time
flies.
Yeah.
With people like you.
So, Tim, where should we start? Because I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about what you're doing internally and the insights you've had with this event, whatever it's going to be called. And I'm interested in what you're doing regionally. Okay. So, which do you want to focus on first?
Well, look, they're related.
Yep.
So we can start wherever you like, but I think a logical starting point is March the 25th, which is, of course, when New Zealand went into level 4 lockdown. And, I think maybe not for those of us that are slightly older, but I think for maybe that millennial generation, March the 25th will be that September 11th moment that, everybody remembers where they were when our Prime Minister stood there and told us that we had 48 hours to get our shit together, because then we were going to go home for 4 weeks.
That caught me by surprise. I don't know why.
The level 4 didn't, but the duration or the length of the time that we were going to be under those conditions definitely did.
Yeah.
I thought, fuck, 4 weeks.
Yeah.
That's a long time. And I was actually in the boardroom here with a couple of others, and I knew everybody else thought exactly the same thing. Everybody sort of looked around and stunned disbelief. 4 weeks. Sure, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
So, look, I think the most common and overriding emotion that we observed over that 48 hours of level 3, and then as we emerged into level 4, was fear. And there's nothing new there. Everybody saw it, and it was a very sort of primal fear. We were scared for our lives. some people.
Yep. And that was real.
That was very real. In fact, does it get any more real? And so Norwood was an essential service. And so in the space of 48 hours, we sort of had to reinvent ourselves. We had to switch some of the lights off, and we had to turn some of them up quite bright. And that's the service side of our business mostly, the things that we do to keep farmers moving. So in the minds of some of our staff, not everybody, but in the minds of some of them, we were sending them into harm's way. And that made it very real for those of us in leadership roles in this business, because effectively, in the minds of those people, we were asking them to do things that we as leaders weren't prepared to do ourselves. So it really sharpened our focus looking back on it. It was all about people, and that's going to be a very common theme as we make our way through the next period of time, Harv. And ultimately, that summarises the biggest learning for me. It's the people, and I know that that's cliche, but for me it was a real learning. It was a real practical and tangible experience, and a very tangible example of what it means to actually put people first.
Was it predictable how people, some people reacted this way, that way, whatever? Could you predict it beforehand, how that was going to fall?
Whatever the opposite of that is, unpredictable being an understatement. It was almost a totally random event.
Right.
And I remember going out into the warehouse, and of course the warehouse staff, we had to keep that warehouse up. It was an essential part of our supply chain, and therefore the people in the warehouse were expected to be at work just like they normally are. And I was talking to them, and I could pick up, and it was very obvious with some people that what I was asking them to do was distinctly uncomfortable to downright scandalous. You're expecting us to do what? And one guy broke down in tears in front of everybody, and not quite literally, but almost left the room sobbing.
Yep.
He couldn't handle the thought that he was going to have to expose himself to an infection that was potentially going to kill him.
Was his health compromised already?
It was, and as we learned very quickly after that, he was someone that we would not be expecting to come into the warehouse. And so of the total contingent that work out in our parts warehouse, and let's say over a couple of shifts there's 20-odd people, I'd say almost half of them were immune compromised, which meant they had to go home, which meant that we had a hole to fill. And that's when we started to see some of these amazing behaviours, people that would normally have no interest of picking parts and putting them away and dispatching them, putting their hands up and saying, hey, I'll help. And there was this real sense of people putting their collective shoulder to the wheel, so to speak, and that was very heartening. But, to your question, we couldn't predict anything.
Yep.
And so as a consequence, we had to build a very, very small but agile and really grunty team of people that were prepared to deal with that constantly changing landscape. And we created a small team of people, the COVID response team, it was initially called. In response, we were on the back foot. We were dealing with things we've never dealt with before, like every business was. And we just made our way essentially through a checklist every day.
See, I don't think it was the same for every business, Tim, because you guys were an essential service. Most of us weren't. So most of us actually just hunkered down and literally did fuck all.
Yeah.
So I think this is different.
Yeah. And so I said earlier, we switched some parts of the business off and we had to turn the lights up on others. And, I suppose in those areas, that's where we saw or observed the most random behaviours. And when I said it's all about the people, we're thinking about the people as a team of 400. But actually it's bigger than that, because most people have got a family or a partner, or they're connected in some way to others. And so suddenly, without thinking too hard about it, actually we think we're working on behalf of 1,000 people. Yep. Maybe more. And that's what got me thinking about the regional stuff that we'll get into in a moment. But with respect to Norwood, it was literally dealing with decisions that affected 400, but also dealing with situations that affected one person. And they're equally important. Yeah. They're an individual who's left the room crying because he's worried about a deadly infection. Yep. Is potentially on the edge of something much darker than that. So we deal with that very quickly, but at the same time we're trying to write policy for the balance of the business, the 400 people that are supposed to be going out there as essential workers with no essential services number. It's those sorts of things. And I know the government said all act in good faith, but people were scared. There were roadblocks, there were police checking, there were, in some parts of the country, the unofficial roadblocks,
yes,
which made people really nervous too.
Yeah.
So it was all these random variables that none of us would have ever thought we were going to have to face, and yet we were trying to reinvent a business, literally by the day, reinvent a business around those things that were changing.
So what was it like for you personally?
I'm not the sort of person that lies awake at night, and that's because I don't get too stressed about financial, commercial things. Occasionally I do, like anybody, I suppose, but I don't have a sort of tendency to lie awake at 3 a.m, tossing and turning about certain commercial things. I lay awake tossing and turning, thinking about people and people. What would I do? How would I feel if someone tested positive to COVID and or even worse, bought an infection?
Yeah.
You
were the one of the instigators of them of that happening.
Exactly. Yeah. So suddenly health and safety took on a very, very different...
Because 400 people is a hell of a lot of people scattered around the country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very different to you, perhaps to your point. We're not a small owner-operated business where the owner of that business can walk into the store or whatever it is every morning and look at his staff in the eye and feel reassured that certain things are happening or not happening. We had to build policy, and then we had to build processes and systems that was going to support those processes, and we had to do it all on the fly, and then we had to have some sort of level of reassurance that people were actually going to follow the damn things as we put them together. And that, I think that's what kept me awake. I was worried. I was worried about the people.
Yeah.
Which sounds very noble. I don't mean it to be. I mean, it's just...
No, it doesn't sound noble.
For me, it was very different. Worrying about numbers is one thing. Worrying about someone getting sick and potentially worse than that, it's quite another.
Yeah. And Tim, just, you made this point earlier about the people, right? Well, that surprises me because to me you were about the people before. So what's happened?
Yeah, I think I would have claimed to have been about the people before.
Right.
But I wasn't
Yep.
about the people
Yep.
before to nearly the same degree that I am now. And there's no easy way to explain that, but those decisions that we all faced as we made our way, in particular through the first couple of weeks of level 4, I think about it in my mind. It's sort of like you approach a fork in the road. Left, people. Right, commercial, financial.
Yep.
Every time we approached a fork, we went left. And in the fullness of time, if you think about that, or the extension of that metaphor, we're left. Eventually, we're a very, very long way away from where we would have been if we'd taken even one right-hand turn at the fork. And it made me realise that we're actually in a very different place to what we would have been pre-COVID as a consequence of those decisions that put people first. And the benefit has been enormous. So you're aware personally of our sort of cultural ambition.
Mm-hmm.
We have, like every business, we aspire to certain things and we want our people to behave a certain way and feel certain things with respect to Norwood and our customers. That whole journey has been on steroids. That's the only way I can describe it. This high-intensity environment that we've been working in, I think had the potential to, or certainly was the environment that had the potential to swing things one way or the other. And for Norwood, it has definitely put us on that journey towards what we aspire to be and the things we aspire to do far more quickly, I believe, than what we would have got out of a normal situation, normal environment.
Yep. So, Tim, you're going left, okay, and every time where's that commercially, long-term, what impact is that going to have?
Well, the reason we're so focused on that culture journey is because we're absolute firm in the belief that if we can get that culture right, then the commercial outcomes are going to follow. And so, we shut down locations if someone was off getting a COVID test. We've got people ringing us upset. We've got customers ringing us up upset. Why aren't you open? I need to get this. I need to do this. I'm sorry. We've shut the location down because one person's tested is being tested for COVID will reopen if that test is negative, and if it's positive, that location is going to be down for at least 2 weeks while we get it cleansed.
Yep.
I'm not sure I would have made those decisions quite so readily pre-COVID. It would have been, can we really shut down a location because of an issue that one person is having? In this situation, it was a no-brainer. It was, we shut it down, everyone goes home, keep your eye open for any symptoms, you go in and get tested, keep an eye on your family, keep an eye on your whānau, keep an eye on your friends, keep an eye on your colleagues. We've got to be in this together, and I hate using that because the Prime Minister uses that all the time. But you get the point. It's the people, those decisions that put the people first, I believe, that have put us in a much better commercial position over the medium to long term.
So it's interesting. Shamabeel Jacob, he's the economist, is an interesting guy, and they were questioning him about, because there's this friction between the people looking after the people and the commercial stuff, right? And we don't need to get into politics, but there's this sort of thing going on. And I remember him saying really early on, don't worry about the commercial stuff. Look after the people, and the commercial stuff will catch up. And, it's put the people first.
Yeah. And I suppose that's kind of in keeping with some of the things that I'm talking about, Harv. Now, that's not to suggest that there aren't businesses. This is not about putting your head in the sand and not acknowledging the very real financial pressure that businesses are under. I just think those businesses like Norwood that have the ability from a financial perspective to maintain stability from a workforce perspective as we make our way through the unknown over the next 3 to 6 months, however long that may be. Those of us that have got the ability to weather the storm financially have now got an obligation to the people first and foremost. Financial P&L considerations, balance sheet considerations, they're out the door for Norwood at the moment. It's all about the people, and I've been able to get some support, strong support from our shareholder in that sense as well, which is an enormous relief. So, when we talk about resourcing the business going into COVID, time, people, money, the fourth one there would be shareholder support and generating that goodwill, that capital. And we've burned a bit of that capital for sure with that request, but we believe it's absolutely the right thing to do. We went to our bank, for example, and we said, look, worst case scenario, we may experience revenues of only 10% of what we were expecting pre-COVID going into May, June and July, the 3 months that we believe we're going to get knocked around the most. Leaving April out of it was a write-off. So we went to our bank and we said, here's 10% revenues, this is what it means from a cash perspective, etc. And they funded us to that scenario, which essentially for Norwood means we've got this line of emergency working capital. It's available for us if we need to use it. We haven't had to, and I don't think we're going to need to, but it's there. And it's not there to prop up a balance sheet or to generate additional earnings. It's there to support our staff and to make sure that we're not in a position where we have to retrench.
So coming back to this shift that you've been through, Tim, because, this is, by the tone of your voice and look on your face, that this is going to stick with you.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm most fearful of, actually, that all of this just fades away and, it's back to normal and the champagne corks have popped and hooray, it's level 1. We want to crystallise this stuff, And for me personally, I'm absolutely adamant that this idea that actually it's the people that count and the commercial outcomes will follow is I think going to be one of the cornerstone structures of my leadership style as I make the way through the rest of my career.
Any pushback from the board?
No, we've got a really supportive board. A bit of conversation from the accountants on our board. There are 2 of them, but that's their job. The others are much more general in their approach.
And we'll get on to the regional stuff, but I sent through a wonderful thing last night. It was from the BBC talking about the emotional intelligence of the team. So you often talk about the emotional intelligence of the individual, but it was just talking about the emotional intelligence of the team, and that teams operate when people are more aware of how each other are feeling emotionally and so forth, that the performance of the team lifts, and they don't sweep things under the carpet, and they deal with conflict and so forth. And it means that they can have a lot more robust conversation than they normally would. And is that the same sort of thing that you're talking about, Tim?
The board level.
Or no, and actually in your leadership team and beyond.
Yeah, so I hate that word collaboration.
Did I use it?
No, you didn't. But it's the only word I can use to describe some of the things that I've observed, in particular amongst that COVID response team that I mentioned earlier.
How big was that team?
There was 8 of us.
Yep.
Yeah. From all walks of life and from right across the business.
Yep.
So it was a very diverse, or as diverse a group as what Norwood can put together, both from any perspective, actually. And so I observed what you're talking about first of all amongst that team, and interestingly we weren't physically together, of course, but you could just feel it happening. That robust discussion, I think, another one of the learnings is the willingness, the openness, the ability for a team to have that really robust discussion, and obviously not insulting one another, but we should be able to debate, and we should be able to air our feelings or our thoughts on a particular subject, and in doing so, we can rest assured that all of that collective input is sitting there on the table, available for analysis, available for dissemination, and ultimately available for someone to make a better decision from as a consequence. I first observed it in that team, and then more recently as we've started to get together physically, and as we've been able to communicate a little more in perhaps what I'd call the traditional organisational teams. So, for example, our executive leadership team of 6 of us, I'm observing it there too. So I think people are genuinely starting to understand what it means to collaborate. But, collaboration's only collaboration if we're generating that synergistic effect as well, which is what you're talking about. That emotional intelligence is subject to exactly the same dynamic.
Right.
And we're seeing it. I mean, it's like I said, it's just another one of those areas that I think it's just been on steroids.
So is that just something that has filtered through the business, Tim, or is it something that you've got up on the band, and said, right, we're going over the top, and this is what it's like? Like, how did it turn up?
Well, I think there is very early on when we started to make those decisions around the people being the priority. There was a very keen awareness that some of the things we'd been talking about were actually being delivered upon in practice. And that generated a sense of trust and loyalty, which then paved the way for not just me, but others across the leadership group to stand up in front of teams, whoever that may be. Yep. I now do a full staff live update every Wednesday morning at 10:30. Enabled me to then preach from the pulpit. It's not the right term, but everything I said carried more weight because of the things people had observed as we put people first. So suddenly the things we're saying they've got more character. They've got authenticity being the other buzzword. But so it's a bit of both. But the second part, the bit standing up in front of the people, that's not going to wash if that trust and confidence doesn't exist.
I'm reading a book at the moment. It's called New Power, and it's talking about comparing old power to new power and the old power. So the epitome of old power would be Trump, okay, where it's an individual and he says we do it this way and, it's the way it is. Where the new power is more around collaboration, it's more around transparency, it's a higher trust, it's vastly different. And they give all sorts of wonderful examples of it. And it's interesting how the younger generation are drawn to this new power, and they want to have a say. Is that something? Does that sort of resonate with you?
Oh, big time!
Yeah,
absolutely. And I'll say, I'm probably revealing a little bit here, but that's the way these things go sometimes. I went through a leadership development program that Sarah Tocco actually put together, and she took our executive leadership team at the time through it. So I'm going back over a year. was March last year, I think, March 2019. And it's one of these sort of self-reflective but 360 type reviews of your leadership style. And it's very...
Was that the leadership circle?
Correct.
Oh, it's a monster.
Yeah, it's a beast. Anyway, Tim, describe your leadership style. Oh, I'm collaborative, I'm inclusive, I'm all of these great things. Okay, here's what your team think. You're an autocratic arsehole that fucking doesn't let us do anything. So that was a bit of a slap in the face, It was kind of like, I've got a long way to go in terms of being this effective leader that I, perhaps aspire to be. But that was
Tim, I'm laughing because I did it.
Yeah,
right. I did it, and my one, was authentic leadership. I thought that was me. I came in about 60%, and I was like, "What the fuck?" And so then I complained to my wife, Kate, and I went, "I only came." She said, "Well, it must be the people that." You got to fill it out. And I said, well, you're one of them. It's just, it's a beast of a
beast of a thing. But the point I'm trying to make is that armed with that realisation, whether I accept it or not doesn't matter. Still struggle with it, obviously. But
I wish I could take your photo there.
Armed with that realisation, I set about. I was working really hard to actually collaborate, let other people make the decision. Find opportunities for other people to contribute and let them run with it. And even the work that I would reserve normally for myself alone, let other people go and do that. Prepare a board report with their name at the bottom of it. Provide a strategic input. Provide some strategic input into the plan that we're developing.
With their name on it.
Absolutely, with their name on it, and ask questions, even if you know the answer. Let the team come up with the answer, and often that answer, by the way, is far better than the one that I had preconceived in my mind. So quite quickly, I learned that actually letting others do it, and maybe a team of people do something, was often achieved a far better outcome. And as you know, we've brought some new people into the business recently, and that also gave us an ideal opportunity for me personally, to drop the load, I suppose, that I was carrying. And so, as we made our way into COVID, and again, as I say, armed with what I learned back when we did the leadership circle over a year ago, new people in the program, some really positive experiences, letting go of certain things, enabled us to really leverage up on that collective, that collaborative input.
It's interesting, carrying that load, Tim, in the good old days, that was your job, to carry the load. And, people say that's why he's paid the big bucks, right? The downside of that is it created a whole lot of fucking arseholes at times, or really, really difficult people, because, it was a big load and they wouldn't acknowledge it and they wouldn't share it.
Yeah, and I think there was a tendency to fall into the trap of believing you're the only person in the room that can answer the question. And we see that, played out every day in a horrible way with the bloke that's running the States at the moment. He can't accept that someone else might know more than what he does, which is why he doesn't allow a Bloomfield into the room to talk about a virus. He talks about disinfectant. That I think is an awful example, but it's the sort of thing that we have to absolutely avoid. This is if the new way of leadership is to essentially facilitate that collaborative approach, then I'm all for it.
Tim, look, I'm really excited about this because it's something that I think I've been wanting to get to for some time personally, but now I can see it really clearly. And look, I think the example in the States is really good, because that is the epitome of old power. And the world is too complex now for that to actually work. That the problems we're facing now are really complex ones, and we need lots of people to have lots of different views to feed back into a group that can do something with it.
And what a wasted opportunity, if we don't create a forum for that collective input to exist. It's this sort of intellectual capital that we have, that we possess, the business intelligence that we collectively possess. If you're not letting that seed germinate, and if we're not giving ear to that conversation, then it's just a massive wasted opportunity, in my opinion.
What would be the one piece of advice you'd give or thought or opinion you'd give to a CEO, Tim, out of this experience?
Look, the answer is so simple. It's going to sound cliche and horrible, but it's the focus on the people. And if you don't have the right people, then you've got to get them, and you've got to get them quickly. And the right people is a group of people that can collaborate together.
You said before that you've brought in new people, and I know some of those people, and they would be less traditional than what you would have employed in the past.
Yeah.
That sounds easy as well, but if you don't, and you see it all the time, people bring in great people, but they don't give them the space to do their thing.
Yeah, and so as we made our way through that recruitment process, we had that absolute focus. Why bring them in if they're not going to have the room, the airtime to get things done? But at the same time, we were very mindful of how the people were going to work together. So as we're going through an interview with someone, we're thinking, how is this person actually going to correlate? How are they going to be able to work with someone else that we've just recruited?
Yep.
So we're thinking about the team dynamic as much as we're thinking about the individual. And often we'd find actually that the really good ones would be asking those sorts of questions of us. How much rope am I going to be given? What sort of structure are you going to put around me to support me? What resources are you going to give me in my quest to make your business a better place? And those energizing questions.
2 years out, if we look 2 years out from here, how will Norwood be different if you hadn't had the COVID experience? How can you try and give us a picture of the gap between where you were heading and where you used to be heading and where you're heading now, 2 years out?
Well, I think we'd very clearly defined the sorts of values that we'd like to live by at Norwood, and I don't think they change. The priority order in terms of how I personally might have ranked the importance or the criticality of those values has changed.
Right.
People are at the top now. So,
right.
We're going to be a great place to work. We want great people and all that stuff. That's at the top, unquestionably at the top. Things like being lean and mean have shifted down the list somewhat. And that, again, though, comes back to this point. We've got to ruthlessly pursue the right people, and we've got to have the right people around that table collaborating, and it's something that I will never compromise on ever again. I'm very guilty, hand up. I have in my career many times over stayed away from those difficult conversations with somebody. I will never do that again. So, look, to answer your question,
you have.
From a business perspective, we're going to be a different business. Operationally, we're going to be doing different things. We have to, because, long story short, the old way of doing things is not generating what it once did. So we're going to be doing all of that, but certainly in terms of our culture, what I was referring to earlier is going to be very different.
Because I'm thinking in my head, what impact it would have, and the word adaptability comes to mind. That Norwoods would be a lot more flexible and adaptable in 2 years' time to if whatever came along, you go, okay, so you can change easily to something else.
Yeah, once upon a time, Norwood was the import distribution agent for Massey Ferguson. Right? In fact, the business was built on Massey Ferguson, and there's a wonderful story of Charles Norwood, the business's founder, who was made aware that at the time they were a vehicle automotive distributor as well. The VW representative was making his way to New Zealand on a boat. And there's a wonderful story of Charles Norwood arriving down at Queen's Wharf or somewhere in Wellington in order to meet this bloke. And he as he got there, he realised that, in fact, he was going to be about number 10 in a line of people that were physically standing there in the cold Wellington southerly rain and wind to greet this bloke and presumably try and sort of garner his support. Charles Norwood jumped on the pilot boat and went out and met the boat as it came through the heads of Wellington Harbour, and he did the deal before the boat had even
before
docked.
They got there.
Yeah. So I like thinking that. Now I'm getting to my point. My point is that in about 1980, a business that had built itself almost exclusively on Massey Ferguson, lost the franchise for Massey Ferguson. So that's a sky is falling moment.
Yeah.
And Norwood has had a couple of those actually in the last 3 or 4 years. We've had a couple, and I think our resiliency and our adaptability, which is the word you used, has probably improved from back in 1980 when we lost the Massey Ferguson franchise, but not enough. So, to your point, we need to be much more adaptable. We need to be more resilient. But the other word I'd throw in there, and this is me eating humble pie here, because you and I had a conversation a couple of years ago. I think I accused you of being too very fairy and off on one of your strange tangents. The word you were focused on was curiosity, and I'm throwing that on the list too. We want curious people that are interested in alternatives and why we do things certain ways, and are there different ways of doing things.
It's like all these things, Tim. Saying it and doing it is so different. It's like we've got in the office a buzzword bullshit board. When people come up with these fucking terms and so forth, and you go, they sound good. Collaboration's on the bullshit board. Where people say they
is sustainability on it.
I'm not sure actually, but it's you get these fucking words that people say, and you go, I wonder if they actually have any idea how difficult it is to actually do that.
Well, I'd add that people who use the bullshit words, I reckon I can smell it a mile off now.
Yeah.
And because I feel like I've been forced to use those words, but I know what they mean.
Yep.
If I can think of another word that can replace collaboration, I will.
Yeah. Tim, how do you... lots of talk at the moment that we've got through COVID, and fucking well done us, and well done to the leadership team in Wellington, and awesome job they've done there. And now we've got to focus on the economy. How do you think we're tracking?
From a health and safety perspective, there's no doubt we've done an outstanding job. And I don't, read a lot like you do, Harv, and you get both sides of the divide when it comes to that conversation of should we stayed in level 4 as long as we did and all that stuff. That's irrelevant. The economy was knackered. The moment we had our major trading partners shutting down, we were stuffed. And so our economy was going to take an absolute beating as to whether or not we stayed in level 4 for 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks. We were stuffed. So that, in my mind, really galvanised my thinking around the people again. We are in for a beating here from a health and safety perspective. That was day one of level 4. We didn't know where it was going. There's been some commentary recently to suggest that we missed a major situation by about a week. If in fact the borders had stayed open for a week longer, if we'd stayed at alert level 2 or 3 for a week longer, we'd be in a Italy type situation. So we were close. So the health and safety risk has decreased almost to a point of back to normal from our health and safety perspective. But the fear's just shifted. So fearful for our safety, for our lives. Now the fear is for our economic outlook and our ability to function financially. And I think really closely attached to that is the mental wellness and mental well-being risk. And I think that's still going to increase. So I think the initial risk around an infection, that's decreased if the borders stay closed, and if things track as they are at the moment, then that risk is probably largely mitigated. The financial risk is going to increase. That's everybody knows that. But I think the biggest risk at the moment is attached to that financial outlook, that confidence outlook, and it's the anxiety outlook. It's the mental well-being outlook. Those things are all going to continue to ratchet up, I think, in terms of the risk profile and what that represents to people and by default to businesses. So we're not there,
No.
This notion that, we've had, at Norwood, we've had all of our staff, well, not all of them, but we went to all staff, those that earned above $45,000 per year. We asked them to take a 20% pay cut. We had about a 90% response. Yep, we're up for it. I had people calling me personally, people I didn't know, saying, "Hey, I want to take it up, but I can't for the following reason."
Yep.
And my response to that was, you know what, you don't have to justify it. You know, those people, in my opinion, were making a sacrifice of sorts themselves. You know, that must have been really stressful.
Yep.
Saying I'm not going to be part of the team.
Yep.
And of course, we had to deal with all of that. But again, the point I'm trying to make is that just recently we've made the decision based on the numbers we've seen in April and May, which were substantially better than what we were expecting. Certainly better than that model scenario with our bank, or scenario we modelled with the bank. We're going to put staff back to 100% as of June the 15th, which is in 5 days' time.
Yep.
The risk around that is that everybody thinks we're back to normal.
Yep.
And they start to overlook some of the things that we've made a real effort to keep people focused on in that mental wellbeing space. So ask your mate, ask your colleague, how are you today? Oh yeah? Why are you feeling tired? What?
Yep.
You don't seem quite as chipper today, Harv.
Yep.
What's up? Those sorts of good. We want to really continue to encourage those conversations. We were not the experts. So we're placing that real, I suppose, new sense of responsibility on our management team and on our leaders to get involved in those conversations, not because they're experts, but because we believe they've got a responsibility to pick it up and to pass it on to the experts. So EAP, which a lot of the people listening to this will be familiar with, Norwood,
What's that? What's EAP?
It's the Employee Assistance Program. So, they've got a whole range of specialists that can deal with probably just about any situation. So we want our people being referred to EAP services, who will then triage and direct, to the right entity inside that range of service provision. Norwood is 2% of Norwood staff take up the offer of EAP currently. The national average is about 6%. So Norwood's a long way behind that national average, which says to me we're not doing nearly as well as what we could be in that mental wellbeing space. So that's the focus.
Interesting, Tim. I've been working on this with saying how are you, and how are you feeling, and good is not an answer.
Yeah.
And people go good, and I go, no, I'm not accepting. How are you? How are you feeling? What's going on? And this could be a breakthrough for New Zealand with our mental health, because we've been so stoic for so long. People have said, yeah, I'm good, and then go and top themselves. We've got a long history of that. So I'm hoping that this is going to crack that particular shell at some stage and help us get better at expressing how we're actually feeling.
Yeah. And, I had it was actually quite a moving conversation with a local businessman, runs a similar business in the automotive space here in Palmy, and we were talking about exactly this, and he told me of a situation whereby he had a how are you conversation with somebody. The trigger was a long-serving employee who, out of the blue, said, hey, I'm out of here. Been there for 40 years. Why is that? Oh, no reason, I'm just out of here. Come back and see me in a month. I want to know how you're doing. I'll keep you on full pay. They had 2 iterations of that. So now 2 months later, the bloke comes back into the business, and he's suddenly a bit more chipper, and he wants to get back into work, and he wants to detail vehicles or whatever it was he was doing. Point being, he wanted to come back to work. And about a week after that, the person in question that I was talking to and this employee of his were travelling together in a car somewhere, and just out of the blue, the bloke in the passenger seat said, that day I came in to see you, the very first day when you sent me home for a month on full pay, he said I'd made up my mind that day that I was going to go home and kill myself. These are the sorts of things that perhaps we can stop, perhaps by digging into the questions in the way you described just then, Harv. Perhaps by having those conversations we can intervene.
Yeah, and look, I know our facilitators say, Tim, that tell me that the more accurate you can be in naming how you're feeling, the more resilient you'll be. So actually, which has been difficult for me for years, because I was either happy or sad, or happy and fucked off or whatever. But actually, didn't go, how am I feeling? I'm feeling anxious. That's what I'm feeling. And by actually naming that you're feeling anxious, will diminish the anxiety.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is, just to actually have the ability to focus on what is it you're feeling. So, hopefully this, there is a chance that we could actually make some progress with this.
Yeah, we have to. I mean, we think we're advanced in many areas of industry in New Zealand. And on a global stage we are. We compete really well, but we don't at any level when it comes to mental wellness. No matter what the metric is, we're way down the list.
And considering we live in one of the most magnificent places in the world, our mental health thing just doesn't add up. So there must be something. I'm not going to get into it because I don't know the subject well enough, but I always said there's obviously something with our communication or with our culture or something that is tripping us up.
Well, think agriculture. Agriculture would probably be one of the most, if not the most, at-risk industry when it comes to this subject. And I can think of some of the very physical realities of being a farmer, days and days alone, working alone. Perhaps a lot of time to think about purpose and bigger picture and all of those sorts of things. And up until recently, not too many options in terms of where you can go. If you want to put your hand up and say, hey, I need a hand, or I'm not feeling 100 today for whatever reason. Thankfully, organisations like Farmstrong and one or two others are
doing a fabulous job.
Doing an awesome job in that space, yeah.
So, Tim, let's move the conversation then to what you're involved in regionally.
Yeah. So I've been part of a number of economic development initiatives. Pre-COVID for years, there's something locally here called Accelerate 25, which is a regional economic development program that is it's a governance group, really, identifies some projects that came out of a regional growth study that actually the economist you mentioned earlier authored. Now, those projects were then assigned to a project team, and the people in that team would report back to the governance group, city council mayors and district council mayors, etc., and one or two business people, myself being one of them, which was a really fulfilling experience, actually. I'm not one that can handle too much bureaucracy, but this was quite a nice balance. More recently, and as we made our way out of level 4, it goes back to the beginning of this conversation, I started to think about the responsibility that the larger employers in Palmerston North, so quite a narrow scope, the larger employers in Palmerston North might have with respect to sustaining the economy through the coming 3 to 6 months. So again, that's the scope. Palmerston North City, next 3 to 6 months, what can we do? And in summary, the answer is preserve jobs. Tony Alexander, who you'll be aware of, right at the beginning of COVID, surveyed, I think he did 80 businesses.
So that he was, is he still with the BNZ?
No, he's gone out on his own.
Right, so he's an economist?
Yeah, he was the former chief economist of BNZ.
Yep.
A little bit like Cameron Baggery, he's gone out on his own.
Yep.
So anyway, he gets quite a bit of airtime, and I remember reading something within the first few days of level 4, and essentially he distilled down all of this feedback that he'd been getting from a survey that he'd conducted with about 80 different businesses that had been around for quite a while. They'd gone through the late 80s share market crash and every other major financial event since then. And the questions was, what have you learned from those situations? And what advice can you give businesses today? And I was just shocked by what he said. He said, cut hard, cut deep, cut fast. And I thought, you know what? I don't want to be anywhere near that end of the spectrum. I want to be down the other end. Financial considerations, they go out the window if we're true to that belief we have. And here at Norwood, we like to think that we support the communities within which we operate. If we're true to that, then our job is actually to preserve jobs. Now, we can do that at Norwood, but how can we help do that across the city? And I was able to bring that conversation up with a smaller, in another one of these groups that I participate in, which is it's a small group of other business people in the city. It's got no affiliation to any central authority. And again, you'd know the names. There's 5 or 6 of us. Mm-hmm. And I brought that up, and the idea stuck. And the 5 or 6 of us decided that actually we'd try and promote that idea and we personally funded a radio campaign, and we asked others to participate. So we held a summit of the 40 largest employers in Palmerston North. And again, I should just state that we're firm in the belief that this region, I think, is relatively well off. We've got some large employers that are not going to be as badly impacted as other parts of the country. So we're not, a tourist destination, although I think we should be. We don't have a huge hospitality industry, but we do have a large education industry here. We have a large agricultural services industry here in Palmerston North. We have the military. We have a large health provider that employs a lot of people. So long story short, we should be quite well placed, relatively well placed to weather this. And so if that's accurate, then how can we mobilise the largest employers with this collective objective? Can we create a collective objective? We preserve jobs. That's the objective. It's as simple as that.
And so what are you going to do between the top 40? So between that top 40, how many people do you employ?
20,000.
Okay, so 20,000 in a provincial and the Manawatu?
Yes, yeah, across the Manawatu.
There's a shitload of people.
Yeah, it's a lot of people, but the military's in there,
Yep.
the universities are in there, the hospital's in there.
Yep.
So accepting that it's kind of skewed into that public space a wee bit. But we did get 40 businesses in the room. Well, initially it was in a virtual room, so that was Summit 1, where we pitched the idea, and it was 2 or 3 of us essentially presenting, making a speech.
And what was the idea? Specifically, what was the idea?
The idea that we've come up with is that we have, and I'll get to this in a minute, we had the potential to create a digital platform upon which employers that might need to retrench could indicate their intentions on this platform. Those employers that might have a short-term ability to take up those people that were at risk of being retrenched could, in theory, be a way of protecting jobs for the next 3 to 6 months. We firmly believe in Norwood as a business that we'll get a lift in spring. We just do. Our customers start to do more things, and as a consequence, the farmers, that is, do more things in spring, obviously, and as a consequence, our business lifts. But a lot of businesses do. Real estate lifts in spring. It just does. So, hence the time frame, the next 3 to 6 months. What can we do to preserve jobs? Well, maybe we can share resource. And as we got thinking about it, we realised that we could get caught up in a whole lot of red tape, individual employment agreements and variation letters and all those sorts of things. So it's distilled down, I think, into a simple secondment process. So I'll use an example which is fictitious. It doesn't exist. But let's say a local automotive dealership owner is facing the very real likelihood of having to retrench a couple of roles. And let's say those roles are a yard person, someone that cleans cars, someone that gets them ready after a service, those sorts of things. There's a couple of jobs there. Norwood might have a couple of roles going out in the warehouse. So those 2 people that are theoretically at risk are placed or made available on this digital platform that I've been talking about. And we've got a simple process that then takes place. Those people are seconded to Norwood. That automotive dealership invoices Norwood for the cost of those employees. Right. Norwood pays the invoice. So So
they're still working for their employer.
They still work for the employer.
But the finance, right, so it gets around the red tape.
It does. Now, the other part to it is that, I don't know about you, Harv, in fact, I do know. You don't know how to build a digital platform that could deal with this sort of stuff.
I could do.
I certainly can't, and neither can anyone else on that group. So to the 40 people in the room at Summit number 2, and by now we're at level 2, I think it was, we were able to gather at the convention centre. The Mayor sponsored that. So we got 40 people in the room, sitting 2 metres apart from one another, in front of a panel of 3 or 4 of us. And we started talking about this idea. We got the support of 3 businesses in the room, but we could have got more easily. We just stopped at the first 3 that put their hand up, to contribute to a small group, a small project. So Norwood put 2 people up, Fonterra put 1 person up, Plumbing World put 1 person up. So now we've got a team of 4 people in a room. Their task was to build the digital platform that I've referred to, and they had 2 weeks to do it. And man, we referred to collaboration earlier in a broader sense. This was collaboration on steroids, a really narrow scope. 4 people, really smart people that have just put together the most awesome prototype, and those 4 people are going to be presenting it to those 40 people at Summit 3 in a week's time.
Brilliant.
And I get to have the first look at it on Thursday, tomorrow. I'm really, really excited about that. But it's just an excellent example of what can happen when everybody puts their mind to it.
Do you think this is going to roll on down the line, Tim, that going, okay, that, you know, how do we work together more provincially to solve problems?
You know, if it doesn't, it'll be heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So I think we've got a real obligation. We've got to do everything we can to sustain these things that are genuinely just so good. You know, there's nothing bad about them. And I think, you know, Palmy is, again, I think uniquely placed, but the model is translocatable.
Yeah, you can do it anywhere.
You can do it anywhere.
Yeah.
But just a bit easier, I think, in Palmy because we've got a bit of scale, but the reality is we know one another.
Yep.
We might not be going out for dinner with one another, but I can still pick up the phone and talk to those 40 people on a first-name basis.
Yep.
So we definitely got that going for us. The other thing, and this is no disrespect or criticism of the public entities that are tasked with this sort of thing, it was a mistake at Summit 2 to hold it in the convention centre because some people thought that by default this was a city council initiative.
Right. Yep.
This is a small group of businesses that is being managed, and there's an even smaller group of people, I should say, that are coordinating how those 40 entities might operate. That's that small group, of which I'm one that I referred to earlier. We are there to work alongside City Council. We're there to work alongside CEDA. We're there to work alongside the Chamber of Commerce. If they want to take the credit for this, and in fact I think we should just hand it over to one of those entities and let them run with it, then perfect. It's all about the objective.
Yep.
And it's beautiful because there's no affiliation. You know, we're not sponsored by a council. We're not sponsored by central government. We're just doing it ourselves.
And Tim, how would, so for other regions, because this is the only one of its type I know about in the country, there might be others.
There may well be.
What would your advice be to people? Just what would it be?
So people need tangible examples of stuff happening. And the mistake I referred to earlier, holding this thing in the convention centre, you know, I was sitting up on the stage, I could see people's eyes glaze over. Fuck, here we go again. You know, so-and-so talking about all these great things that we've got going for us, and, you know, I've just wasted another 60 minutes of my life. But as we got talking, you know, people started to sit up a bit straighter. So the first piece of advice is identify something really tangible that you feel you might be to deliver upon. Because once people feel like they're actually going to be able to do something, see something different, they'll get behind it more quickly.
Yep.
And so that was, in our situation, that was preserve jobs. How are we as a group of 40 of the largest employers in Palmerston North going to preserve jobs? Okay, people start
so I can picture that.
Yep, people start sitting up a little bit. Okay, now we need some tangible examples of how this group is actually generating results. Enter the digital platform.
Yep.
How are we going to do that? Why don't we get a group of our high potential people in a room together and let them solve it?
Yep.
And that's how we did it. So I think at Summit number 3, those same 40 people, and I bet you there's more people in the room, by the way, at Summit 3.
Right.
We got about a 60% strike rate. So we invited 60, 40 turned
Yep.
up. I think there'll be more.
Because why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Why wouldn't you be part of it?
Yeah.
And so those 4 people that put this product together, this platform together, are going to present that to the team, and I think it'll be a really tangible, real-life example of how this group of people's got the ability to really make a difference. And ultimately, hey, it's the digital platform. That's not the outcome. The outcome is a digital platform that enables us to preserve jobs. And so we've set, that small team of 4 people have set some performance metrics around it. They want, I think it's 60 people benefited from the product inside the first month. So we're going to have some really tangible outcomes here. I think that will be quite galvanising. It'll be quite energising.
I've said it to you before a few weeks ago, Tim, when we first talked, when you explained this, and you had the pleasure of meeting Aniki Goodall a few years ago, and I said to you, Aniki would be very proud to hear what you've been part of.
Yeah, look, this is going to sound really silly. That's one of the most humbling things I think anyone's ever said to me. Aniki wouldn't remember my name, but I tell you, when I met him, I was blown away. That's probably the most inspiring now that I can remember in my lifetime.
Yeah,
and similar themes coming through, but it's not until you're tested, and it's not until you realise firsthand the benefits, and in this instance of putting people first, that you realise why those words that I heard from Aniki were so influential.
Yeah. Tim, we need to wrap up, and we're going to do a follow-up interview. I'm not sure when, somewhere in the future, because I'm really interested in seeing the journey and reviewing that down the track. How would you describe the difference between the Tim Myers I met 7 or 8, 9 years ago and the Tim Myers that sits here today?
That sounds like a question I should be asking you.
I got him first.
I'm not. I don't know. I have. I'm going to come back to this people thing. The answer's deeper than that. But I don't want to run the risk of sounding a bit silly. But yeah, it's the people, and my newfound understanding and deep belief of what that actually means in practice.
What a great way to wrap up. Tim, thank you very much. Well done on what you've been doing for the 400, for the 1,000, for the 20,000 people, and good luck on your journey.
Thank you. And hey, I'd be missing an opportunity if I didn't say to the people listening, thanks for listening. But also, if you've got any ideas, or if you want to contribute, or if you want to be involved in anything you've heard about in the last 10 or 20 minutes or so, please give me a call.
Brilliant. So we'll drop that on as a link, Tim, on the podcast, and we'll get this up reasonably soon. And I think this will be up in a couple of weeks. So we'll put a link there for people to get in contact with you.
Great. That'd be awesome. Look after one another.
Okay. Cheers. Thank you, Tim. You've just been listening to an episode of Stuff That Matters Now, brought to you by Collective Intelligence. I hope you enjoyed listening to the fun stuff, the rugged stuff, and the complete stuff-ups that have helped this particular Collective Intelligence member evolve while making the world a better place. Do check out our Stuff That Matters Now podcast series on your favourite podcast provider, or visit our website www.collectiveintelligence.co.nz to get links to new episodes. Contact us if you want to learn more about how we can help you evolve yourself and others. Thanks for listening.